JD has shared much of his life through his own eloquent words to explain, from the heart, why I love and admire JD and stand here beside him today.
JD Vance built his reputation on being tough, outspoken, and unwavering in his beliefs. But what happens when the person who knows him best, his own wife, publicly calls him out in a way no one saw coming? Usha Vance, a highly accomplished attorney, didn't just disagree with her husband, she embarrassed him in front of everyone. Was it a slip of the tongue, or was she sending a clear message? Let's break down the shocking moment that left JD Vance stunned and everyone else wondering what's really going on behind closed doors. Usha Vance's speech. The energy in the room shifted the moment Usha Vance approached the podium. Until now, she had been a quiet presence, respected, intelligent, but rarely the center of attention. Tonight, however, all eyes were on her. The murmur of the crowd died down as she adjusted the microphone, her composure unwavering. JD Vance stood to the side, expecting the usual. A speech about their family, their shared values, or a carefully crafted message of unity. Something predictable. Something safe. But the first words out of Usha's mouth changed everything. A ripple of surprise spread through the hall. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. There was a sharpness in her tone, a hint of something just beneath the surface. JD's smile remained in place, but he felt it, an unease creeping in. He wasn't the only one. President Trump, standing nearby, shifted ever so slightly, his hands clasped in front of him, his expression unreadable. He was listening. Closely. JD had seen that look before, the look of a man assessing, calculating. The cameras clicked, the crowd leaned in. Washington thrived on moments like this, moments where words carried more weight than they seemed to on the surface. Usha continued, her voice smooth yet deliberate. People often ask what it's like being married to the Vice President of the United States. A few chuckles scattered through the room, but the anticipation was palpable. She let the moment linger before adding, especially considering that, once upon a time, he swore he would never enter politics. The statement hung in the air longer than expected. JD's practiced expression didn't falter, but he could feel the scrutiny, the way glances flickered toward him, toward Trump. A joke, a simple remark, or something more. Beside him, the president exhaled a quiet, nearly imperceptible huh. Was it amusement? Curiosity? A test? JD wasn't sure, but he knew this. Usha had just shifted the balance in the room. And everyone was paying attention. But what came next will shock you. A moment that won't be forgotten. People ask me how I feel about my husband becoming vice president, Usha Vance said, her voice steady, her expression composed. A pause, just enough to hold attention. Honestly, it's still a little surreal. This is the same man who once told me he wasn't sure he even wanted to be in politics, that government was too messy, too ugly. And yet here we are. Soft laughter rippled through the room. JD Vance's smile remained, but something inside him tightened. He had said those words, once, in the privacy of their conversations. But now, here they were, spoken into microphones, carried through the air in a room filled with Washington's most powerful figures. I've had a front row seat to JD's evolution, the writer, the commentator, the senator, and now the vice president, Usha continued. It's been quite a journey, especially for someone who once told me, I'm not sure I'd survive in Washington without you keeping me sane. Laughter again, this time louder. But it wasn't just amusement, it was knowing. JD recognized it immediately. A joke that hit too close to home, a comment that invited speculation. His practiced grin didn't falter, but his mind raced. Washington was a place where perception was everything, and his wife had just handed the room something to dissect. He felt Trump shift slightly beside him. The president's expression remained unreadable, but JD could sense it. He was listening, absorbing, calculating. Trump had spent years navigating rooms like this, rooms where a single remark could shift alliances, plant doubts, or open doors. And I'll be honest, Usha added, turning to her husband, her smile widening just enough to suggest she knew exactly what she was doing. I still don't know if Washington is ready for JD, or if JD is ready for Washington. The laughter was louder this time, but so was the tension. A murmur swept through the crowd, quick, subtle, but unmistakable. JD could feel it, the way heads turned slightly, the way glances were exchanged. Words like these had weight, and in Washington, weight had consequences. His fingers curled slightly at his side. Was this just a playful jab, an offhand remark meant to lighten the mood? Or had Usha just shifted something fundamental, something that would follow him beyond this room? Beside him, Trump exhaled a quiet, almost imperceptible chuckle. Not amusement. Interest. JD had expected Usha's speech to reinforce their image, to solidify their presence. Instead, she had left the room with something far more valuable. The tension in the room. The mood in the room became tense as cameras clicked. A low hum of shifting bodies rippled through the room, but no one spoke. JD Vance sat still, his politician's smile firmly in place, though his mind raced. Beside him, Trump moved, just slightly, just enough for JD to catch it. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't clapping. He was watching, calculating. JD knew exactly what that meant. Usha stood at the podium, poised and composed, as if she hadn't just redirected the evening's narrative with a few carefully chosen words. If she noticed the weight of the moment, she didn't show it. Instead, she let the laughter settle before adding, "I say that with love." JD's a quick learner, though I do wonder if he ever misses being a best-selling author instead of, well, you know. Laughter burst out again, a little too loud, a little too knowing. JD chuckled along with the crowd, but inside his stomach tightened. He had been in politics long enough to recognize when something had slipped out of his control. This was supposed to be a smooth event, a well-orchestrated moment of unity. But now, thanks to a few well-placed words, the media had something new to dissect. Would they call it playful banter? Or would they see it as something more? Trump finally exhaled a low chuckle. "Well, he's got a good woman keeping him in line," he said, his voice just loud enough for the room to hear. On the surface, it was a throwaway remark. But to JD, it felt like something else. A reminder. A test. Usha turned to him, smiling unreadable. "I try," she responded effortlessly. More laughter. More flashes of cameras. More subtle shifts in the room's energy. JD felt it happening, the slow, creeping realization that this moment was already becoming something bigger. He spotted a group of reporters near the back, exchanging glances, fingers tapping on their phones. Washington had its own language, its own way of absorbing moments like these and twisting them into narratives no one had seen coming. He could already picture tomorrow's headlines. Is JD Vance ready for Washington? A vice president or a man being led? Even if the speculation was baseless, it wouldn't matter. Doubt had been introduced. And in this town, perception mattered more than reality. The crowd returned to their conversations, but JD caught the occasional sideways glance, the quiet whispers that confirmed what he already knew. Something had shifted. Something he hadn't planned for. He turned his attention back to Usha. She had stepped away from the podium now, engaged in casual conversation with the senator's wife, completely at ease. Was she even aware of what she had done? Or was this all intentional, a well-placed comment designed to send ripples through the night? A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne. JD declined with a polite nod, his thoughts still racing. He needed to control the narrative before it spun out of reach. Should he address it? Laugh it off in an interview? Or would silence be the better strategy? Before he could decide, Trump leaned in slightly, just enough for JD to hear. Well, that was interesting. There was amusement in his tone. But JD recognized it for what it was. A test. But what if this wasn't just a slip-up, but a carefully crafted move to shift the narrative? Stay tuned to find out. A subtle shift in the room. The applause wasn't quite right. It was polite, scattered, enough to be respectful, but lacking the warmth that should have been there. Not for the second lady. Not for a new administration still riding the wave of its early days. JD Vance felt it immediately. The shift. The pause before the claps. The slight hesitations in the room. Too subtle for an outsider to catch, but impossible to miss for someone who knew Washington. And Trump had caught it too. JD didn't need to look to know. He could feel Trump's smirk, could almost hear the unspoken "I caught that." It was the same look he had seen in debates, in meetings, in those moments when Trump filed away something for later. This wasn't going to be a scandal. It wouldn't dominate the headlines. But it wouldn't be forgotten. Washington thrived on moments like these. Not the explosive, career-ending missteps, but the small, quiet cracks that took root and spread over time. And this? This was a crack. Usha walked back to him, her expression unreadable. Calm. Composed. Completely unaware, or completely aware, of what had just unfolded. JD gave her a brief, practiced smile, one that revealed nothing. Behind them, conversation resumed. Glasses clinked, and muted laughter filled the space, but the undercurrent of something unsaid still hummed beneath it all. JD could feel the eyes on him. The reporters taking quiet mental notes. The donors and strategists exchanging glances, recalibrating their assessments of him. Then came the voice. Low, measured, deliberate. Well, that was interesting. Trump's words barely carried over the din of the room, but JD heard them clearly. He chuckled lightly, masking the tension. She keeps me on my toes. Trump's smirk deepened, his fingers tapping idly against his glass. That she does. The words could have been nothing, a casual remark, a simple acknowledgement. But JD knew better. In this world, words were never just words. Trump wasn't offering a compliment. He was making an observation, a calculation, and the unspoken question hung between them. Who was really in control? JD had spent years navigating Washington's brutal terrain. He had learned how perception worked and how small narratives could be shaped, twisted, and weaponized. He had fought to prove he belonged, to show he could handle power, that he wasn't just another politician waiting to be molded. But now, for the first time in a long time, He felt it slipping, just a little. And Trump was watching. JD followed his gaze across the room, landing on the group of journalists lingering at the edges, their conversations hushed, their eyes flickering between him and Usha. Some weren't even pretending to focus on anything else anymore. "They'll spin it," Trump said, tilting his head slightly. "Turn it into a whole thing. Is JD really his own man? Does Usha have more influence than we thought?" JD forced a tight-lipped smile. "They always do." "Yeah," Trump mused, swirling his drink. "But this isn't going away overnight." The amusement in his tone wasn't just amusement. It was something more. A test. JD exhaled slowly, casting a sidelong glance at Usha. She was still chatting, still poised, still seemingly untouched by the waves her words had sent through the room. Or maybe she wasn't untouched. Maybe she had seen it coming. And if she had, that meant something even more complicated. Trump set his glass down with a quiet clink. "It's always the little moments that get you," he said, almost amused. "Not the big ones. The little ones. The ones that sneak up on you." JD knew exactly what he meant. The political landscape wasn't shaped by scandals. It was shaped by moments like this. Moments where something shifted just enough to plant a seed of doubt. And seeds like that, they didn't just disappear. They grew. JD Vance feeling the weight of the moment. JD Vance had spent enough time in Washington to understand that real consequences weren't always immediate. They didn't explode into scandals or ignite firestorms. Instead, they lingered, settled in the background, and resurfaced when least expected. Tonight had been one of those moments. The evening was winding down, but its effects were just beginning. As JD moved through the room, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, he caught the subtle shifts in demeanor. Some guests smiled too easily, their expressions unreadable. Others nodded just a beat too slowly, as if acknowledging an unspoken truth. Nothing had been said outright, but in Washington, it never had to be. And then there were the journalists. JD had dealt with the press for years. He knew when a story was forming. A few reporters still hovered at the edges, their eyes sharp, their murmurs hushed. They weren't just covering the event anymore. They were dissecting it, piecing together the subtext, deciding whether Usha's words had been a mere offhand remark or something more. Trump's silence had been even more telling. If he had laughed or brushed it off, JD could have moved on. But he hadn't. Instead, he had simply watched, taking it all in. And that was worse. JD stole a glance at Usha. She was poised, effortlessly engaged in conversation, as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just altered the tone of the evening. Was she truly unaware of the ripple effect she had caused? Or had she known exactly what she was doing? Trump finally leaned over, his voice quiet but deliberate. That was a great speech. The words were simple, but JD heard what was left unsaid. Trump never gave praise without reason. He never acknowledged something unless it mattered. The night continued as if nothing had shifted, but JD knew better. He kept shaking hands, making polite conversation, smiling in all the right places. But beneath the surface, his mind was elsewhere. This wasn't the kind of moment that faded overnight. It wouldn't make front-page news, but it would linger in the background, waiting. The kind of thing Washington would remember, reference, and quietly weave into the bigger picture of his political future. Trump had a long memory. And moments like these? They were never truly forgotten. The fallout in motion. JD Vance knew the game. Washington didn't operate on truth. It thrived on perception. And tonight, the perception was already shifting. As the car pulled away from the venue, the glow of DC streetlights flickered through the tinted windows, casting patterns across his face. He was already thinking ahead: damage control, media strategy, political fallout. Was it better to address this head-on? A carefully worded statement? A lighthearted social media post? Or would silence be the smarter move, letting the story die before it gained momentum? Beside him, Usha sat quietly, her gaze fixed on the passing streets. She didn't seem tense. If anything, she looked at ease. As if she wasn't the reason the press would be dissecting every moment of the evening by sunrise. JD could already hear the headlines forming. Usha Vance's words raise eyebrows. Vice President caught off guard by Second Lady's remark. Signs of tension. He had seen it happen before, an offhand comment turning into weeks of speculation, a single sentence becoming a narrative too big to control. The silence between them stretched, thick with unspoken calculations. Finally, he exhaled, shifting slightly in his seat. "We'll need to get ahead of this." His voice was measured, deliberate. Usha turned her head slightly, one brow arched. Ahead of what? JD studied her, trying to gauge if she was truly oblivious to the political weight of what had happened, or if she knew exactly what she was doing. "The press will turn this into something. We either shape the story, or they do." A slow smirk played at the corners of her lips. "Or, we let them wonder." That response caught JD off guard. He had spent years mastering the art of controlling narratives. In Washington, uncertainty was dangerous. It gave opponents room to twist, manipulate, to exploit. But Usha wasn't a politician. Maybe that's why she saw things differently. Or maybe she understood something he didn't. You didn't mean anything by it, right? JD asked, his tone carefully neutral. Usha finally turned to him fully, her dark eyes meeting his. There was something there, something unreadable. Amusement? Defiance? A quiet challenge? What do you think? She asked. JD hesitated. The truth was he didn't know. If she had spoken without thinking, the fallout would have been manageable. But if her words had carried intent, if there was a message behind them, then this was something else entirely. The car slowed as they approached their residence. JD exhaled, rubbing his temple. Damage control had to begin now. But as he glanced at Usha once more, a new thought crept into his mind. Had she just made a misstep? Or had she done something far more calculated? Set something in motion that he hadn't even begun to understand? What if Usha's move wasn't a mistake, but a calculated play in a bigger game? Keep watching to uncover the truth. The morning after. By dawn, the previous night's whispers had turned into full-blown speculation. The media was circling, eager to dissect every word, every glance exchanged between JD and Usha Vance. It was no surprise when reporters gathered outside their Washington residence, cameras rolling, waiting for a statement. Usha Vance stepped forward, her posture poised, her expression unreadable. The political world was watching, and she knew it. But she wasn't rattled. If anything, she looked prepared. Our family story is an Ohio story, she began, her voice steady. My husband JD grew up in Middletown, and things weren't easy. His mother struggled with addiction, and his father wasn't there. But JD was lucky. His grandmother raised him with love and strength. He served his country as a Marine in Iraq, and now he serves Ohio. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. The reporters leaned in. He's an incredible father, she continued. He's my best friend. He shared his story in Hillbilly Elegy because he believes in the promise of hard work, in second chances. He wants for Ohio what Ohio gave him, a chance to build something better. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken questions. Was this damage control? A subtle redirection? Or something more, a reminder of JD's resilience in the face of scrutiny? Usha didn't offer anything beyond what she had said. No explanations. No clarifications. With a composed nod, she turned and walked back inside, leaving the press to interpret her words as they pleased. What do you think? Was Usha's speech just playful banter, or did it reveal something deeper? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.